Alrighty, everybody. Hello, hello. Welcome to all of you who just joined. My name is Joe Amditis. I am the Assistant Director of Products and Events here at the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University. Just back from a week of vacation. I'm excited to dive into one of my favorite topics is neat, cool tools for newsrooms. So today we're going to be joined by RJI Fellow Ryan Restivo, who's on the call with us. I'll bring him up on stage in just a moment. He's going to talk to us about YESEO, a new Slack integration tool that he's built as part of his fellowship to help newsrooms use GPT-related technologies to improve their headlines and their general news gathering and documentation operations. So just a few notes at the top before we start. This meeting is being recorded. We're going to share this on our YouTube afterwards. If there's anything you want to say at any point during this that is proprietary or sensitive, or you just rather not have it up in public, please let me know, and I'm happy to pause the recording while you do so. Also, please keep the chat active. This is, this is going to be relatively informal. Ryan's going to give us a brief overview of YESEO and then a quick live demo of how it works. And then we'll get right into use cases, questions, and, particular applications for you and your newsrooms. This is primarily for local newsrooms, particularly smaller newsrooms of, 1 to 7, but people or staff employees, but it's certainly applicable for larger newsrooms as well, as I'm sure Ryan is going to explain. This webinar in particular is for local newsrooms and how they can use it. But lots of potential here with the tool. I've had a chance to play around with it myself. It seems really cool. It seems really easy to use, and it's built into Slack. So without further ado, you see on your screen now, this is Ryan Restivo. Ryan, why don't you take it away for us? And if you have any questions at the end, you can put them in the chat. You can also raise your hand if you want to ask them out loud. I will be managing the stage, if you will, as we go on. So Ryan, why don't you take it away?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joe, for the introduction. And thank you to you and the Center for Cooperative Media to allow me to be here to present. And I'm going to share a presentation. I'm also coming off of vacation. So I'm still getting back into the swing of things as well. But yeah, I am going to do a brief presentation. I'm going to do a brief demo for you all, and then I'm happy to take any questions. I've been hit with a lot of questions over the last 5+ months, and I feel like I've heard a ton of them, and I'm happy to answer anything that anybody else has to remove obstacles, to make sure that they get the most out of what I've done here, right? And like you mentioned, I'm here to talk about the SEO, right? My RJI Fellowship project. It is it's grown and evolved. It launched in March, and it's changed a lot since then, right? And that has to do with a lot of different things that have happened. But I would have never had this opportunity without RJI's help. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this was to use what I've learned over the years in my background to help more people, right? That's what this has been all about, right? Building free, accessible, practical innovation, and seeing people use it all over the country and the world, and people embracing it, using it, and getting value out of it, right? That's one of the reasons I wanted to do this. And so I'm happy to share with you all the story of that, and then all the other good stuff to follow. The goal of my RJI Fellowship was to create a Slack bot that helps newsrooms with SEO best practices, and that's pretty loaded, just first sentence, right? But now, right on the other end, any newsroom with a Slack workspace can install this. I tried my best to lower the obstacles, the barriers to entry. And you could see now over 200 workspaces have installed it. And as of July 24th, I announced that the SEO is available in the Slack app directory, which is like the place for you if you're looking for Outlook or Dropbox or any of those other integrations that you'd use. You just search SEO in there, and you can actually just search yes, and I think it shows up first, which is useful, right? And that was a few months of hard work, right? And figuring out, working with Slack and figuring out all the different best practices for applications that they have on their end. There were integrations that I made because of those kind of settings that I would have never thought to do. But this was a whole 8-month fellowship project, and now it's 5 months since it's been released back in March, and so much has happened. But so much has happened, but it also starts from like the core principles, right? The pillars of what I've tried to keep in mind ever since like a year ago or over a year ago now. And think about how to make this work and how to make it work in the future. And a lot of that started with talking with people, right? Understanding the problem space. And what I learned in research interviews very early on was to focus on the headline. You'll hear me talk about it a lot. Probably you'll see a lot having to do with the headline, right? And that's because one of the quotes that really stood out to me, right, was that the headline is the most important thing that a journalist has power over to make sure their work is read. That part always kind of strikes me, right? Power, right? Tools, we want to empower people to make better decisions. So every time I'm thinking about how to build on the experience that exists, try to build off of that, right? Try to reduce the time to come up with the relevant headline. Reduce the time to think about what keywords are in my story using natural language processing, which was like the cooler thing before all the AI stuff, right? And then kind of give you insights to act on that you might not have otherwise thought of, right? And then 6 months into an 8-month fellowship project, this GPT thing comes out, as Joe knows, and has a great guide that you can all access to. You have to think about how to find a practical application for something like that. And given my experience and background, tried to land in a spot where YESEO looks to give helpful suggestions that users can take and change their liking. I'll show this off in a demo in a little bit, but the kind of core experience that you'll take a look at when we get to this step is kind of breaking down content, right? So the idea kind of stems from breaking down a story, kind of thinking about what are the elements of a story? Why did this story not rank well? And the idea kind of came from like, we didn't have all the things that were necessary for the story to rank really well. The person who was in the main subject of this person in the story wasn't like anywhere near to be seen that anyone would find. So no wonder we didn't do well in a competitive market. So one of the goals of the SEO, right, is to kind of give views like this, where it's breaking down how often you're using your most prominent keywords, thinking about how you're using them, thinking about what to target. It's pulling out those keywords to give you trend data to act on, which is that button explore keywords. And then it's giving GPT suggestions, making it simple, right? Clicking a button, that's all you're gonna have to do to generate headline suggestions, as opposed to any other work you have to do, right? We'll try to reduce that barrier and kind of make sure you can get to that quickly. And then sharing, right? That came from testing. Specifically, the Philadelphia Inquirer was testing, and they're like, oh, these reports are great, but how do I share it to somebody else? So I click a button and you can share it instantly to any channel or person that you want to. And so that was kind of the original idea. And then it was like, somebody asked me, okay, well, yeah, this is a great idea, but what about stories that aren't published, right? You could do great with a story that's already out there. And then similar report kind of comes up, and how I kind of think about conquering this is using a text box in Slack as opposed to worrying about what kind of CMS there is. That way it's always agnostic to anybody's CMS. You could be using any WordPress type or any other of the CMSs out there, and you would be able to use this, right? Because it's just copy pasting text, and you generate a report kind of similar to what is already existing in the previous one. And you can still share, you can get suggested headlines, and you can kind of explore those keywords, kind of think about what you could think about in terms of before you publish. And then I have like cute little QR codes every once in a while, so you could scan those if you like to see some cool stuff. But one of the best things about YESEO is that anyone can install it. And it's been great to learn the stories and experiences. One of the things that I learned over the first 5 months is that since YESEO doesn't require an email or a login or any credit card or any information to sign up, I actually lack a lot of information before I figure out who is installing into their workspace. So I've had to like backtrack in terms of a journey and think about like, okay, this person's installed, and try to figure out where they are. And then I've eventually built like some onboarding stuff where you can give an email that can stay in contact with you, right? But it's helped me figure out like how to contact people, how to learn about their experiences. And I've started to compile stories from outlets that have used it and are willing to document it with me. So these are a couple quotes that kind of stand out and how they've used the GPT suggestions. They've empowered their teams to use it, to kind of take those insights and make decisions off of what it gives them. And a lot of that has been, it centers around the idea of you're getting 5 ideas, but you're not getting 5 perfect ideas. You're getting things that you can change and merge, and you can change with what you need, and kind of figure out a way to mix to get towards something that you want. And that's where I kind of try to pitch a lot of the, especially AI kind of ideas. It's like these things are here to check on our like priors, right? They're here to kind of check on all the things that we might think to do, but maybe they'll introduce a new idea that they want to, that will help us. And so this is an actual this is one from a newsroom, I think back in June. But these are how they look, right? It's to give a practical product to newsrooms and give those suggestions. So I had somebody tell me back in, I want to say June too, there's like technology and newsrooms equals fear for a lot of people. And so I'm trying to reduce that by saying, trying to soften this language at the top, right? These are ideas. Nothing is an NLPL, nothing's writing into your CMS. You have to take this and make a decision. So a person's always going to be a part of this equation. And that's where I try to talk about it, right? People are always going to be part of this equation. We're making stories for people. So we want to make sure that we're making those decisions, and people are always a part of making those decisions. And that these are ideas that check on your, check on your intuition, make sure that you fit into your style for your newsroom, because we're not applying certain styles, right? These are some other quotes that kind of stand out from some of the case studies that I've started to run. I've had a ton of feedback on how friendly and easy to use it is, right? This last quote is about like a newsroom that honestly didn't have Slack, but set up a workspace to try SEO, and they are loving using it, right? So you can go to YESEO.app/case study. I don't know if that QR code is the same link, but these are just a couple of things that kind of stood out to me in terms of people learning along their journey, and it's been awesome and exciting to see people use it and get value from it, and then kind of discuss with them what has been working for them, what hasn't been working for them. Off of these GPT suggested headlines, every time I'm trying to encourage a feedback loop, you get something that looks like this. It looks pretty, it's not a ton to look at, but it's something that's helping me constantly learn and evolve, right? So off of each of those headlines, asking users if these worked for them is super vital for me to make improvements across the product. And that's kind of driven a lot of experimentation and growth. So this all started, it was back in, I think, around April, when I was working with Nick Diakopoulos out at Northwestern University as part of his generative AI in the Newsroom Challenge. And his first question was, how could I message a user directly? And I didn't have an answer for him at the time. So I needed to kind of figure out a way to build some messaging in. And that's helped me, not just in terms of onboarding and getting people to understand the value proposition of what SEO offers, but also in terms of encouraging this kind of feedback, right? After you've asked for some headline suggestions, you can get this message back, and they can get a button click that says, yes, did this help me? Did it not help me? Or I'm not sure if it did. And that kind of feedback encourages first test. This first test was, since GPT-4 cost 15 times as much, didn't actually give journalists better options. And what we found in the initial tests, which got a 40% response rate, was there was very little difference in terms of how users responded to suggestions by model type. And users didn't have any awareness of which one they were getting. They just saw GPT suggestions and they would click the button. But this test framework really helped me. And you can see that by going to SEO.app/study. But it helped me learn, not just in terms of this, but also build some more experiments. So in the testing feedback, there's also a little feedback form after your answer. So I was able to read some of those, and some of them suggested like, this isn't in the style or what I would do, right? Or this uses title case and my newsroom doesn't use title case. So I saw some interesting things when I look back on that kind of other data that I got from it. So then I made one adjustment, and that adjustment was very tiny to my prompt. It was add AP style. That was basically it. I just wanted to say, use AP style, and let's see if this works. Not knowing what it knows about AP style, but just adding, try to use AP style. Which some folks at the AP will tell you that it doesn't exactly know AP style. But this test reran, just reran that test with this one change, and saw, you could see a 10-point jump on the model for each of these, for the headlines, right? So 10 points from GPT 3.5 and 15 from GPT 4. So it's telling enough that I've included that in future tests, and now I'm iterating over that to build future tests. You can learn more about that one by going to YESEO.app/IJNet. That was a piece in July 24th. That also announced that the SEO app is available in the Slack app directory. And then I was like, okay, well, what else can I show off that's new? Well, this research was new. And then I have a third test that's going right now that I actually haven't really talked about. So this is all breaking news here, right? is kind of centered around the knowledge of the workspace. So let's say you're going to start using SEO because you've heard this awesome presentation, and you start running a couple of tests, and you see some stories, or maybe you're like a certain outlet that writes sentence style headlines versus kind of other types of headlines. So in this test, the idea is to kind of understand what kind of headlines you write based on your workspace number. So they're like these T numbers in Slack, to try to say, okay, here are some headlines that this T12345 workspace did. Can you write a headline similar to that with knowing that? And I did it to just use the workspace name because I didn't want to like bias it in any way based on just the workspace name on its own, because Slack workspace names can be weird sometimes. But it also felt right to protect privacy. So I've been building this test and other tests based on feedback as well. One thing I've been thinking about a lot is using the natural language processing to identify story types. So if I could say if it's a news story or a sports story, could we kind of drive better insights knowing that versus just kind of saying it's a story from one outlet or the other. But there's a lot of things I'm still just working through. Yeah, I'm trying to remember if here's another slide here somewhere. It talks a little bit more about experimentation, I think. But I'm going to show a couple of things that I have not shown off to anybody before in the demo phase of this, right? And those are kind of one newsroom asked about, okay, these headline suggestions are great. Could we do like social media messages? So I've run a test with them so far, and trying to think about that point of view of what data can I use to drive at building a good experiment? What do I know about this place, and what can I use to help kind of leverage, get them more out of what they're looking for? And so we're trying to think that through. And then there's another experiment I'm going to show off related to it's like keywords, search keywords. So kind of generating some more data off of a search keyword that you may have used, and then kind of running other reports. So I'm going to show that off for the first time. So hopefully it works. But yeah, 200 workspaces have installed it. It's as easy as going to YESEO.app and hitting add to Slack. It supports eight different language models, which I'm sure some folks are going to tell me I should have probably talked about in the beginning. So it does that, being agnostic to not to knowing what's in the story. It just reads the story and then kind of infers which language it should use, which language model. So if you want to put a story in Spanish in there, it'll understand based on either the title or the text in the story that, hey, this is a Spanish story, I should apply the Spanish model. And again, right, absolutely free. Thanks to RJI, University of Missouri. I hope you'll continue to see some fun stuff from me, because I'll be around over the next few weeks and months, right? I'm going to be at ONA for the first time. That's like 10 days from now, right? In Philadelphia. YESEO is part of ONA Startup Alley. So in the Midway area or thereabout, you'll be able to find me. I'll be at SourceCon 2023 in Minneapolis in October. Nikita Roy, who hosts the Newsroom Robots podcast, and I will be co-facilitating a session that should be a lot of fun. I got to meet her out at Media Party in June, so that was great as well. And if you want to, I think that one is actually, I think, my contact info. So if you scan that QR code, that will actually give you a little like businessy card of me. And you can get in touch with me by going to YESEO.app/me. And if you click on the email, I've already pre-filled out parts of the email, so you could easily say hi, and I give you a couple ideas of what you want to write. But yeah, the YESEO has been an awesome adventure for me. I've learned so much, and I'm happy to take any questions. I see there's a bunch of questions at this time, or at least there's something in the chat. But I'm happy to answer any questions. But I will also be able to move into the demo portion in a second here.
Okay, I have a question real quick if nobody else does. So I already know the answer to this, but I'd love for you to sort of look at it a little bit. So why is this so much better than me just having chat open, or me just using Zapier in my API key with OpenAI, where I can customize the prompt, the user message, the assistant message, and the temperature and all that? What makes this, especially for newsrooms and particularly newsroom employees who don't know how to set up an API, for instance? What makes this
Right.
so valuable to them, and how can you see that? What are the differences there?
Yeah, I think it's a kind of, I mean, I'm going to piggyback off your answer to use exactly what you said, right? It's that part of the doing the work for you, right? You know, I've had a privilege, right, that I've been able to do a lot of different things in my background for a newsroom. And then building this project through RJI, the goal is to affect as many newsrooms as possible, particularly small local newsrooms. And those are places that are not places that have sometimes people like ourselves, they're able to do this, right? So I've already made those integrations. I've set up the key, I've set up exactly what you need to do in terms of the user and the system. And like I said, I'm continuing to tinker and experiment with how to improve this. So, so all of that is being done. And like I said, right, it's easy as hitting the button, right? You just hit suggest headlines and you're getting what you want to see. You're getting suggestions that are going to help you make your stories better, as opposed to going and really tinkering with all this stuff. And everybody's welcome to tinker with the stuff, but
Yeah.
But I'm offering it for free, right? And you're able to get that improvement right away. So, and then built right into Slack, making that integration possible,
Yeah.
making it quick, making it easy. Folks use Slack a ton.
Yeah.
So making it easy and actionable for people to
I will
get
just
those
say,
better
I'll just
results.
say one of the things that I really like about it, and you mentioned this in your slides, is the little buttons that you've added that allow, like similar to the way you'd wrote in a poll in Slack. That is something that as someone who has used the API, integration to pull GPT prompts or whatever into Slack, I use it for like my email. Like when I have an email that's too long, I just have it summarize and give me action items and potential replies, stuff like that. But it is so sorely lacking the ability to add action buttons. So I love that. Number one. Number two, three things. Number two, is it in the plans, or is it possible to maybe now, especially with like ChatGPT coming out with the custom instructions thing for all free users, is it possible on your end to maybe eventually allow users to add some additional assistant instructions? I know you mentioned this briefly, but did you get into whether or not that is possible, or even coming down the pike at any point? Because I would imagine if there's a settings option, right? You can open the settings. Is it possible with the way that Slack works to allow users to set that, or is it because it's in a channel, it would be too open to multiple requests and conflicting requests? You know what I mean?
So
Like,
I'm literally kicking the tires as you're saying it right now. I could think of
okay,
a way
yeah,
to make it work. Yeah. So
yeah,
like it's something that could definitely be done in the future. It's interesting in terms of feedback that I've gotten from newsrooms. One thing, as you kind of see in the demo, people they're not frustrated, but they understand when I
yeah,
tell them about the process of how YESEO works, that they have to set where their location is and in a particular time frame based on their story, and that's to give them control over that piece of it. Um, and so based on that feedback, I've had people say, I want to set it and just kind of set it and forget it, right?
yeah,
So I've had to think of like, okay, how can I build a system where somebody's going to set it and forget it and be okay with that?
cool.
And so like when you talk about how can I integrate or how can I make customizations there, it would just be a similar system that I have
Okay.
to build and kind of create on top of the existing work, and then say, okay, well, Joe's workspace says he wants to do X on top of what we already built.
Yeah,
So
I'm
that's fine.
imagining it
We're
like
gonna do it. Yeah.
I'm imagining having it so like you can only change those customizations for like the DM version. So like if you can talk to YESEO as a direct message, then that individual user or whatever can maybe change that. But that maybe get a little complicated. And you did mention this is free, which I love, and that's one of the reasons we agreed to do this webinar, is because I hate hawking for the vendors with the 1,000-yard dead-eye entrepreneur stare, and you're clearly not one of these people. You're offering it for free. What's the
Yeah.
plan?
No credit
Do you
card,
have,
right?
do-
No.
yeah,
Yeah.
do you, yeah, exactly. I don't have to make a fake email address, a temporary email address sign up. No.
No
Do you
login.
have
Not
plans?
selling an ad
Because
to you. Oh, sorry.
at the same time, I love people getting paid and fairly and compensated for the work that they do. You've obviously put a lot of work in this. Before we get into this demo, because I really do want to see the demo, do you have any plans for monetization? What are you thinking in those terms? Is this a purely passion public service project that you're doing? Or are there plans going forward to maybe introduce some kind of tiered or whatever? How are you planning on monetizing this so that you can keep it running, is at the very least?
That's a fair question. I am lucky and fortunate that I have that RJI supported me to get to where I am right now. And I'm trying to continue to build on that, right? In terms of just thinking about how to continue to pay for the costs of running, servers and all that fun stuff. Right now, I feel like the costs are not there in a way where I'm going to be able to cover them for a long time. I'm not really concerned about that at this point. to what you said, yeah, I think that, it would be ideal to have some kind of subscriber or kind of some kind of where
Sure.
somebody could give some money and get more. But I think that the part I really think about is the get more part of it. Like the SEO is being offered for free. But if you're going to get more, and we're going to see a couple of things that might be kind of cool.
And
But
does
if
this
you're going to
real
get
quick,
more on
does- so
top of
does
it, you have
'cause I
to,
know
you have to
OpenAI
give more. I feel like that's the only thing for me.
no, absolutely. But I mean, I even at the very least, and I maybe you mentioned this, but like I know OpenAI lets you use API access per usage. It charges you how much you use it. And
Yep.
is that it? Did you mention that? Is that how you give an API key and then so the charges are going to
So
your API, or
you're
are you
no, you're
footing the
using
bill
my
for
key.
this?
I'm footing the bill for this. Yeah, I'm putting the bill on the
Wow.
key.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah.
Cool. And you said there's 8 different language models that it's compatible with. So it could be like Claude or, whatever, Bard and stuff like that.
I'm
as well.
talking about when I say 8 different models. I'm sorry, I'm jogging back to different language models, right? So identifying a
literally
story
like
if it's
different language.
English, Spanish, Portuguese,
Got it.
Chinese now. So just by entering that text into the text box or entering the link, the application side is understanding, okay, I need to apply the proper model. And if it doesn't know, it actually falls back to English, which maybe is not
Okay.
great. But I had a tester who was working on stories. It was in French Canada, right? So this English one's not exactly working for me, right? So you have that and kind of use that, and then kind of go from there. Oh, I think you're muted.
No, I was
sorry.
talking to a boss who had a question as well. We do have a question from Nancy. Nancy, I can read it out loud, or you can unmute and ask. But yeah, Nancy, do you want to unmute, or do you want me to just read it?
Sure, I'll unmute. And I can put my video on. My publication isn't locality specific. It is age and gender specific for girls ages 8 to 14, which includes gender diverse kids in that age range. But our audience in Google search is parents, other adult family members, teachers, librarians, youth workers. Is there a way that I can use SEO without making it a whole new thing? Since I don't have a locality or whatever to put in.
So when you're broadly looking at trends, are you looking worldwide, or are you kind of US
looking
focused?
in the age range, but our
Okay.
subscribers are primarily from North America, but we do have subscribers around the world. We're getting an increasing number from India. So, of English speaking, we don't publish in different languages at this point. So
Yeah, I think there will be applications for you all to use it. I'll when I demo this, right, you'll kind of get a better sense of what I mean by the location as part of the steps. But when I think about location in terms of this, it's one of parts of it was keeping place in the center, right? Because place is so important. Also, it was about working with newsrooms at the University of Missouri, right? And understanding that when you do a global search for Columbia, you get Columbia, South Carolina more often than you get Columbia, Missouri. But yeah, so like adding that as kind of a step worked in terms of just how the product kind of is structured. And I'm happy to kind of take us into Joe, depending on what you want to do.
Perfect transition.
I'll take into demo transitions.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, perfect segue.
The segue into the demos phase. Okay, so live demos can be fun. So bear with me a little bit. But yeah, you're going to see a lot of different stuff in here. You're going to see 2 different tests that I'm actually going to point out once they start popping up. And one of them I mentioned before. And I actually don't have a story for the first test. Okay, so the first test I'm going to do is using, well, let me show off a little bit. Okay, so this is, when you go to SEO, this is, I need to update this a little bit more, but this is like an app homepage, right? It gives you documentation. It gives you all this different little bit tidbits about each command, right? /analyze, /prep are the 2 main ones that we're going to look at here. So popular and /lookup are less popular, but they are still important, and I could show those off in a little bit. There's some surveys, some documentation, or if you have an issue, you can click a button and you can actually just send information pretty quickly. But the main work that you're going to do once you install SEO, you click add to Slack. as easy as that, is in the messages panel. And I'm going to use direct messages. Some folks will do it within the channel. But I'm going to just, for the sake of this test, use this.
Sure.
And this is a different Slack space that one person I think would know about in here.
If we
but-
gave you a story to use as a sample, would that work? Does anybody
sure.
have anybody brave enough to share one of their stories that Ryan can use in a live
I
demo?
have one just in case, but yeah.
Yeah, he's got one in the pocket. But anybody have one, a recent story they want to use as an example? If not, I can send one, or we can use the example you have, Ryan. Drop it in the chat,
Okay.
and Ryan will grab it and drop it into his machine.
This is what makes live tests so fun, because you never know
Always.
what's going to happen.
All right. If nobody else
Alright.
has one, I have one. I'll put it in the chat, and then if anybody else drops one, use theirs. But here's one. Oh, there we go. We got the Star Tribune. Thank you, iPad.
Okay. Thank you. Yes. Okay. All right. So I'm going to analyze what is going on at the Star Tribune. I don't know anything about the story, which is okay. But I'm going to take this, and all I'm going to do is hit. I have my story, so I copy pasted my story. Right, it's easy as copy paste. Trying to make it simple for somebody to just easily do this. I hit enter, and I'm going to go through the flow. And we're doing some work in the background right now. And then it's going to ask me this question that I think we were just talking about, right? Enter what country, state. A DMA is like a media market. So you think about Joe and I think, are both in the New York City media market. But if you think about like other media markets like DC and Miami and yeah. So we could turn this up to a state. We could turn it up to a DMA.
Let's
I
do
see we're
Minnesota. There we go.
Yeah. So I'm just going to do, this is a text search enter, right? So when you text search, it's just going to check all the different data you could possibly use. If you do something incorrectly, it'll come back. So if you like misspell something, that it should come back for you. And so I'm going to get this and I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to apply it for Minnesota, right? Let's take this story from the Star Tribune and apply it across the state of Minnesota. And then this other step is going to ask you for a particular time frame to run some trend data. This is going to be looking for either, if it's really big breaking news, I could say, okay, maybe the last 4 hours, the last day. Maybe this is something that has taken a while, so maybe the last 7 days, or I could try the last month. I default to trying the last 7 days. So I'm just going to click that and it's going to disappear. It's going to tell me, yeah, thank you for selecting it. And it's going to tell you something funny, hopefully personable. It takes about 2 minutes from here. Yeah, I have not practiced my Oscar speech anytime soon. But if you have, one of the first ones I wrote was about, let me think. It'll take about as long, oh, see, it's already ready. It'll take about as long as it takes to drink a cup of coffee. And I don't drink coffee, but one of my first jobs was at Dunkin' Donuts. So I used to have a terrible coffee smell on my shirt all the time. But yeah, so now our report is ready, right? So I'm going to check it out. All I have to do is click this button and I'll see all of this different stuff. So I will see, and you're going to see some extra stuff that we're going to go check out a little bit.
iPad, you're going to have to keep us honest to make sure this information is correct. Drop in the chat if you see anything. Oh, they have a question. Why is
time frame important in the results? So when I click this keyword research button, it's using that time frame that we provided to get that data. So if I thought, so right now it says, oh, I think the story is about Minnesota, which is because it's one of the most prominently used keywords. And now we're getting some extra messages that I'll share in a little bit. But all of the Google Trend data that's going to get pulled out for you is using what you provided, the state of Minnesota, use my hand, state of Minnesota in the last 7 days. So I'm getting information about these particular trends in the last 7 days. And I'll actually click it here. I can show it off real quick. So I click keyword research. This has actually changed a little bit since the initial launch, which is like everything else. So I think your story is about Minnesota. I've pulled some trends for Minnesota in the last 7 days, some related queries. So kind of taken what's in there and kind of explored what is relevant, what are kind of related queries. These are things that are likely to someone be searching for, possibly some, so maybe there's a particular soccer story related to what's going on in Minnesota right now. And I can click these and I can get some Google Trend data. I would just pop out and I would get some trend data for Minnesota in the last 7 days for this area. And I could see what exactly is going on in here. And I hope that worked because I opened the tab. And then kind of some other rising queries. So this is actual Google search traffic in those last 7 days of particular terms that are related to Minnesota. And then I have some, and I could also click, I could click on any of these if I wanted to right now. I'm going to learn a little bit more about Minnesota just because I want to learn more about Minnesota, right? So what topics strongly correlate? What does Google think Minnesota is? It's going to think it's a US state, or, oh, Minnesota State Fair, if that's something that's happening right now. University of Minnesota, fun fact is we're going to be at SourceCon in October. So that's going to be a fun time. And then I could see, okay, what queries are related to if somebody enters Minnesota, the Minnesota Twins, Minnesota. So these are what strongly correlate to that term. And we see the Minnesota State Fair here as well.
Well, is it just pulling Minnesota generally Minnesota related stuff because we typed in Minnesota?
Because Minnesota is a keyword in our story. Yeah. So it's trying to pull for
the
any.
story seems to be about like nonprofits and labor staffing shortage and everything. And I'm wondering if that's sports stuff seems to be very heavy in the recommendations, and whether or not that is something we can tweak and refine there. You know, see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, it seems to be very heavy on like just general Minnesota stuff, as opposed to how the individual topic of the story relates to Minnesotans. And maybe that's just the perils of a live demo. I understand that that's possible, but is that something that you can refine or like correct as you back and forth with it, YESEO, or is that once it starts doing these searches, you aren't able to drill down anymore, or how does that work?
Once you kind of do these searches, it'll kind of play off of what it knows, and it's gathered all of this now. So it's actually, so at like the 2 minutes or the Oscar speech or whatever, well, it's gathering all that knowledge while you wait, and then it's kind of gathering up and saying, okay, yeah, and we're using a very broad one for Minnesota.
Right.
Search, and Minnesota is going to be too broad. But we are trying to just gather all of that data. So like if I had a bigger view, if I did a US based story, I might have some different things that show up here. And I did pick the broadest thing of everything to kind of just show off all the things that happen, like the rising topics. Like
okay, that's what I figured. I wasn't sure if that was just, okay, that's what I figured it was just for the test purposes, but okay, cool.
But then, yeah, I'm looking at rising topics, and I could break out to any of these Google trends. So if I knew if I knew some soccer thing was going on, I could see what's happening here.
Okay.
And then I could also get the rising queries. This is all the core search data we've kind of seen already by volume, right? So if people are particularly looking for a certain thing, you kind of see that related to this query. And yeah, we did pick up, let me see, that people was here. The people incorporated must have had a little bit of trouble there.
I really like I really like how it's like, it says, if you scroll up, or where was it? Where did it say? It said something is mentioned. There we go. People incorporated is mentioned 3 times in the first 20 graphs, and it's not in your OG description. That kind of stuff, just from somebody who has to constantly correct metadata and social share images and everything like that. I love that, especially because that's the kind of stuff that I wouldn't naturally notice off the bat. And I wouldn't even if I were dropping things into ChatGPT manually, it's just one of those questions that wouldn't naturally arise at the top of my mind. And so to be able to really optimize or whatever the SEO at that level, I think off the bat, even without the whole like keyword stuff, that kind of stuff, like make sure your metadata matches and tracks with the emphasis and the focus that you want. And you see stuff like this in MailChimp when they say like, oh, your headline for your newsletter sucks or whatever. I think Grammarly might do a little bit of that, but particularly for newsroom SEO optimization and metadata stuff, I haven't seen anything that really is good like this. So that is promising. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and you could thank Michelle Gordon out at Northwestern for that, because we were having a conversation, and it was in October, and she was like, can you just figure out what's in the story and like relate it to that? And I think that night I was like spinning up a test, right? Trying to figure it out. Like I could pull these headlines, I could count them. The count actually was tricky for some time because I actually had some like incorrect counts for a little while.
Yeah, the LLMs are not good at counting or math, really.
Yeah, once I figured out the math, in like February, it's been very good, right? It's trying to figure out, and you could see some stories will have a lot more, but how strongly or loosely related these kind of keywords are to what's in your story. And we're pulling some more later on down the line, which is why you saw some extra keywords in there, like people that are kind of.
Neri has a question about keywords. Neri or Neri, could we use multiple keywords to focus on a particular subject? Is that right?
So we're talking about, we can use multiple keywords in this story, yes.
Neri, do you want to unmute and ask and clarify? Mary, do you want to unmute and clarify real quick what you mean? There we go. Oh, I see you're unmuted, but I can't hear you.
How does the tool work with unpublished stories? I'm getting there. This is, yeah, so I will get there too. Hold on, I will pull another, I'll pull my second test.
While he's doing that, Gary, it doesn't sound like your audio is working, so maybe you can provide some more information in the chat. Sorry about that. We'll put you back on mute for now, and then you can just elaborate in the chat while Ryan shows us some unpublished story applications.
Yeah,
I think that keyword part is really important, and I think it would be really useful to know. But go ahead.
No, and yeah, it's yeah, that's a great question. And so like, while I'm trying to pull my other story, I'm just gonna kind of pull that real quick. I should have had this prepared before we got started, but that's okay. So yeah, we haven't even scratched the surface, right? We only clicked on one thing.
Yeah.
We click on the second one.
Headlines. Yeah, I want to see the headlines real bad.
Give the people what they want, right? So yeah, so use the GPT language model to see if it can make an SEO friendly headline for your story. That's all you see, right? So you could see why GPT language model, they'll build an experiment off of that, as I talked about before. And like I said before, like we talked about, Joe and I just talked about, right? It's as easy as clicking suggest headlines, as opposed to working or making your prompt or doing anything like that. And yeah, and then I click it here and we're going to see what happens, right? It's tell me it's working on it, and then we're going to get a couple of well, we should get 5 options, right? And this is to iPad, right? The iPad user. These are the headline ideas generated by GPT, right? So so we're talking about, we're trying to draw on what's in the story to kind of generate these ideas, right? And as part of the experiment that I'm working through, right, it's trying to understand, hey, I'm in this particular Slack group that does headlines like the ones that I've entered in the past. My headlines are probably wild because they're all different things because I'm testing stuff. But based on that, I will get some ideas here. And I've heard from particular newsrooms that say, you could read them at yeseo.app/case study, right? Yes, I saw the circle. That sometimes they'll take some of these ideas, or there are 5 ideas here, and they're trying to be diverse. So so you could take you could take a piece of one and then a piece of another and kind of work them together. And that's what we kind of see, right? And then you need to kind of massage it for what your outlet style is too. But yeah, so I'm gonna click on the circled get descriptions button.
I'd love 2 things for the headline generations. 1, no quotes, and 2, a copy button next to each one, so they can easily. The copy button's less, useful, but if you have to click and drag anyway. Sorry, go ahead.
Copy button's hard. Yeah, that's the thing, right? So like, but also it also minimizes this threat, right? So
true.
Nothing is writing into your CMS here. You have to come here. You have to copy. You have to take what's here and develop it in the style that you're looking for, which kind of removes that idea that that these robots are coming to take everything. Right. They're here to suggest things that are going to help us do our jobs better, and that's where I'm trying to lead this, right? And these are kind of descriptions that, right, you may want to put as like a deck or a certain place depending on where your CMS does things or what way it does things. And you saw we generated a description that we think could be a description using just what's on the story. But it doesn't necessarily mean that Google's going to take that. They could take the first sentence of the story. They could take whatever, nice. And try to use that in the SERP too. So, okay.
Real quick note, we have about 15 minutes before the top of the hour. If anybody has questions, you can unmute or put them in the chat. But now we're deep into it now. If anybody wants to jump in, otherwise, Ryan, please continue and dive in as deep as you want. I would love to see what happens when you click yes or no or on any of those, like, is this helpful thing? And does it generate feedback to you, or does it redo the?
No, it's a feedback to me. So yeah, that's where I showed that before, right? This is where we're generating feedback.
Gotcha.
Trying to understand if this has been useful to somebody, and then kind of get I see a raised hand though.
There we go. iPad, go ahead. You have the floor.
Hello, iPad here. Quick question, just jumping ahead a little bit. What are some of the most common questions you're getting about YESEO? Can you share some of those with us, and also what your responses are to those questions?
This is always a fun one. And And yes, I like that you leaned in live pad too. I think some of the questions I've had are about, I've had somebody ask me if I will sell their data, and I had to, it's so antithetical to what I've ever even thought of doing with this, right? Offering a free product to help newsrooms. So I've been very adamant that there's nothing in here that's going to be sold to you. Like I said before, right? My job is to reduce the barriers to entry as much as possible. So if anybody has a question of how to install it or what to do once they have it installed, my job is to help you get there, and my job is to help you use it and like it and get you to hopefully the next things that I want to do, right? And so I'm trying to get newsrooms to just understand that this is a tool here to help you. And yeah, I think those are kind of the main questions I want. Yeah, sold data was a question I've had a couple of times. A lot of the questions Joe hit on are things that I've been asked a couple of times, right? How to draw the keywords out or certain things with the keyword data. But yeah, I would say that a lot of people kind of think about this idea like that that maybe those robots are coming to get you, right? Or that there's like AI here to take over everything. And I'm trying to offer these, especially when we just went through the suggest headlines, right? These are options to help you do your job better. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to build a tool like this, and the reason that I've, in my experience, have built tools in the past, right, is to help people do the things that they're looking to do faster and better than they had before. As newsrooms, right, we're usually heavily strained, right? We have a lot of different things we need to do at once, and usually not as much time in the day to do them. So when I build tools, it's about reducing the time and reducing the obstacles to getting the information that I'm looking for. So a lot of SEO is about those principles, right? It's about giving you this information that you've seen in your story that you maybe have poured over so many times, but maybe you didn't take a step back and get an understanding of it, right? It's looking at the keyword data, the other things that I could be looking at that will help me in the future to get better, or things that I could build off of from another story. Suggesting headlines, right? It's about giving you that information right before or after story's been published, and kind of giving it to a publisher so that they can say, okay, maybe our headline wasn't working here. Let's try a different one and see if we can generate some better results. And then sharing is also about just encouraging people to share it with each other and kind of work on it together. And I know that some places have used channels to share it. I'm not going to do that in this demo because this is a very private channel that I'm using for the demo. But yeah, I think that it's all about trying to, in this world where we're using a lot of digital products to help people do their jobs better, to kind of lean into that and get people to understand how these things can do that and remove that threat, right? I mentioned before when somebody told me like technology newsrooms, it was usually really a threat to folks. It's trying to remove that threat and understand and have people understand that these things can help, particularly improve different aspects of the job, so that gives you other things you can hopefully use that time for. Or that's kind of like my core philosophy behind a lot of the things I try to do, and especially with these new things that I'm going to show off in a second. And I haven't gotten to the other story, the pre-published story. I'm sorry. I know I got somebody waiting for it. I will do my best, but I do want to show some new things because I wanted to promise completely new stuff. And since I just built one of these or fixed one of these over the last few days, so this red one right here is about exploring data from keywords in your story, but it's doing something completely different. It's actually going to look at a search results page in Google News and draw out what the top stories are for a particular keyword. So I could see how competitive it is. And I could see what's actually winning in the results. So I'm going to click this red button. Hopefully you guys are all with me. And it's going to give me a bunch of keywords from this story. And I could say, I'm going to do I'm going to do a broader one. I'm going to do Minnesota again, just because it's the most broad. And I know that results should come back pretty quickly. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run this like I would for something else. And I'm actually going to generate a bunch of data that is basically, see how fast it all is. So it just searched Google News for Minnesota in Minnesota. and I'm going to see a bunch of stories and see what would actually look on that page, how the page would actually look in SERP, the search engine results page, and see what else I could draw out and understand from it. So, so see what I found. I'll see that, you know, people also search for all of these different topics, and I could check all of the stories on there. And I've read, like we read the story, we've read the results in the items, and we see that Minnesota's mentioned 7 times in the top 14 items in here. We see what the top story is in the results. We can actually hit this button and it'll actually do an analysis just like we did with the command, because it takes that URL and goes and spits the analysis. And then knock on wood, this button's going to work. But I can actually see what the top 10 stories are for this particular keyword. And I see my top result, which I saw before, but I could also then see what other outlets are getting these top stories right now. What are these stories? How do I know, or how do I kind of figure out, maybe I have something like this story that I maybe haven't prominently put out there. I could break any of these stories down right now. And this is very experimental because I'm just testing it right now. But if I had, you know, looking at Minnesota more broadly, I might want to look at what I have for all of these stories and see what I could do. And then similarly, I could click on you know, news about the Minnesota State Fair, and I could see what stories are popping in Google News right now for this. And you could see each one of these, one from NPR News, right, the Star Tribune, which is what we used before for the test. And then I could break the story down. If I just click the Analyze button, it's actually just going to use all the data we've already given it in the first story to then relate it kind of to search for all the stuff in the state of Minnesota and all that kind of stuff. But this is very experimental. I literally just been playing around with it and with my experiments, right, looking for newsrooms to work with and get feedback and draw out some good results. But then I want to do this second experiment, which I don't know if it's going to work. Working with a newsroom out at the University of Oklahoma that talked about, that actually specifically asked, like, oh, could we do like social messaging for a story, right? Could we have on our story, could we write like a social media post? So what I've gone back to is look at CrowdTangle. Remember CrowdTangle, guys? So somewhat robust API that still somewhat works, and try to draw on some data in terms of what kind of stories that they've made and how to relate what kind of story, a sports story or a news story, and then kind of click, when you click try social messaging, it's trying to identify what kind of story it is, and then kind of using that kind of topic, say, okay, I'll give you some experimental messages. So I'm gonna hit this button, and this is using GPT. Depending that it's working right now, I'm gonna check the logs, and should generate some ideas for you, right? So it's generated a couple social posts to get you started, and these are, you know, similar to what we're talking about in the headlines and descriptions. These are ideas to get you going, to understand how well this works for you, or if there are things in here that summarize your stories. And again, I'm encouraging that feedback loop to see if the suggestions are helpful in any way, and if there are ways to improve it. But this is a one particular newsroom experiment that I'm working on right now that I'd like to open up to more as folks kind of start using and start liking all the stuff that's being offered. And then, yes, and now I will finally, with 5 minutes to go to the top of the hour, do the thing that was asked for before. So, so a non-published story runs under this command called prep. All I have to do is hit enter on that prep, and I will see this text box, right? This text box is just going to tell me paste the story, right? I can, like I said before, agnostic to CMSs. You could just copy paste whatever you have, and I'm copying an AP story because this is how I test. I'm copying an AP story about Hawaii and the wildfires in Hawaii. So I've just copy pasted a few graphs from the top of the AP story, and all I have to do is hit enter, and I'll go through that same flow that we saw before, right? So let's say I want to do this more broadly, so I'll do United States. When I hit enter, it'll tell me, okay, what country do I want to do? It pulls for any United or any states. That's why sometimes you'll see something like that. You can use quotes to make it a little more efficient. I'll run it in the US. I will do the last 7 days because testing. Yes. So I'm still running that data right now. But when that report's ready, you'll see it'll say your report is ready or your analysis is ready, and it'll give me a nice green button that'll invite me to click in. There it is. And I can check out the analysis, right? And I can see now, it's been mentioned a couple of times, I only like the first like 5 or so graphs. So, but I can then draw on, did I write those little weighting quiz for myself, or did GPT do those? Most of them I did write, you know. I think GPT may have assisted in a couple. I did implement like ones for Star Wars Day that went for like 1 day or not. And I might have some for I think what Mean Girls Day is, that October 3rd, right? So I think I have a couple for October 3rd where it'll just tell you it's October 3rd. But yeah, so I can explore some keywords quick. Sorry. And I could kind of see a little bit more data, right? We're pulling some data based on our some data here. You guys are making me laugh in the chat. Some data based on those keywords, right? And then I can learn more about them. We've looked at a couple before. We're looking at Howie, right? What related topics there are, what related queries there might be. This is right. This is, we're using broad across the United States. So we might see what strongly correlates. We might see what kind of topics rise up a lot, and we're going to see a lot because of how broadly we selected, right? Wildfire, breakout. These are kind of the breakout search terms, and I could go look and see what's going on in terms of the past 7 days in terms of traffic for the particular term. Sorry if I missed a question. But I could also then do similar things that I just did now, right? I could suggest headlines. I can click that button. I could generate some suggestions. I've only done a couple of graphs, but I'm still going to draw and get my 5 suggested headlines. The quotes don't always come through, so it's interesting they're coming through today. But yeah, so I can then use these kinds of ideas, and I could kind of draw on them to figure out what kind of select here. And then we're going to that feedback loop, and we could do the description similarly. But yeah, this is kind of what you would see in kind of a story that is yet to be published. You're getting basically a ton of what you're already getting off of an existing URL, but just a little bit differently because of the fact that we're not relating anything that like a headline to what's in the story or anything like that. Let me see. So we have a question. It's good that we could retrieve all of the stories quickly, but how do we check the correctness of the stories before we base our headlines and news off of them? That's a good question. So I guess in terms of like how the system is trying to understand what is relevant and what is in your story, it's we talk about, or maybe Joe probably talks about this too, right? Like kind of educated guesswork that's being done by these kind of GPT and other AI systems, right? We're trying to give them the best information so they can make the best educated guesses for us, because that's the best things that they can do for us at the end of the day. And we're trying to use this informed or more informed educated guesses to help do our jobs better. So, so that's why I always say, like, I think Slack actually made me write something in terms of like how you use GPT or AI, in terms of like how you use the information given from it, right? It's not an end all be all, but you want to use this, you want to use these kind of better informed, educated guesses to make these, to make kind of better decisions. I hope that kind of tackles what you're asking here. But yeah, that's kind of a lot of what you would see, and a lot of, and I haven't mentioned this off the top. I mentioned this off the top, but one of the things that Slack offered, if I could just sneak back onto the recording real quick.
That was my bad.
All good. If I could sneak back in here to do a quick thing, one of the things that Slack asked to do, which is really helpful, and I didn't know this was something that you're supposed to do until I got told, you know, like kind of hand waving that you have to do it. But if I just hit analyze and I do help, if I do help on any command, it'll give me some documentation on how to do it. And that is one of the things that Slack asks you to do specifically. So if I need help with analyze, I get a quick tutorial on how to use it. I do prep, I do help. You should, there it is, get that data and how to do it pretty quickly. So, so not just, and you could watch a quick tutorial of me doing it 3 months ago too. So you have that too. But yeah, that's a lot of what YESEO is at this point. It's trying to help people get to better decisions. It's trying to kind of use information to give people all the data they can to make better informed decisions. And I'm really been happy with how newsrooms have used it. I'm still working on generating a lot of feedback and encouraging that feedback loop. And and I'll be at ONA 23 in Philadelphia in a couple weeks. But yeah, I'm super excited to.
What's an
to-
email address that folks can use to follow up with you? Is it just the ryan.restivo@gmail or?
You can check out my face right here, right? Scan that right now, right? You could scan that right now. Hopefully it works. So somebody in June had this. Yeah. So somebody in June had this that I met had like this digital business card. And I was like, I gotta steal that idea. It was great, right? Because like it was so easy to get somebody's information, what platforms they're on and all that other stuff. So I was like, okay, I built this digital business card. My email's right there, ryan@yeseo.app. And if you tap it right now on your phone, I already pre-filled out like a subject line and some text in there, so that you have something to go with, right? So that when you tap it, you're not like, hey, what am I supposed to ask again? But it also says like, what's your favorite app? It's YESEO, of course. But it's still tongue in cheek, but it's just an easy way to get in touch. Ryan@yeseo.app. I forgot to put that here. But yeah, I'm super excited to have folks here, and I want to thank everybody for their time today and for listening to me, and hopefully you learned something. And if you want to talk more, I'm happy to do that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We're going to send down the recording of this to everybody who registered. And thank you, Ryan. This is great. And I appreciate you keep building stuff. This is good. Really appreciate it. Thanks a lot, folks. And we'll see you later. Have a great week.